I was halfway through chopping firewood behind my cabin when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I turned around and saw a pearl-white SUV crawl up my private drive like it owned the place. Out stepped Nadine Teller, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched like a Bible. Yeah, it was going to be one of those days. She didn't even say hello. "You're trespassing, Franklin," she barked, standing just past the private property sign nailed to a pine tree. I wiped sweat from my brow and leaned on the axe handle. "Trespassing? I'm literally on my own land." Nadine huffed like I'd insulted her poodle. "This lot was designated as community property when the Lakeside Pines HOA was incorporated. You were notified." "You need to vacate immediately." I blinked. "Notified? By who?" She raised her clipboard, tapping a stack of papers I already knew were garbage. "HOA bylaws, amended last month. We're reclaiming improperly zoned lots. This one included." I laughed. "I built this cabin 12 years ago. Before your little committee ever existed. I've got the original deed sitting in my safe." Her lips curled tight. "That deed is irrelevant now. The HOA controls this subdivision. You're impeding community development." "And what kind of development requires kicking me off land I own?" She didn't answer. Just spun around and marched back to her car like she dropped a mic. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Then I walked into the cabin, unlocked the old metal safe in the closet, and pulled out the yellowed paper that proved everything she said was hot air. The deed, dated and signed, with the original county seal from back when this whole area was still unincorporated land. They were bluffing. Or worse, trying to steal it outright. The next day, I drove down to the HOA office, a prefab building near the mailboxes that Nadine had turned into her empire headquarters. I walked in, deed in hand. She was behind the front desk with another board member, some guy named Hal who always looked like he was lost at a PTA meeting. I slapped the deed on the counter. "Here's your irrelevant document. I own that land. You've got no authority there. Try to move me and you'll be dealing with my lawyer next." Nadine didn't even look down. "You're not allowed to threaten board members, Franklin." "Threaten?" I laughed. "Lady, if I wanted to threaten you, I'd have brought a cease and desist." "This is a warning." Hal leaned over to look at the paper, then went pale. Nadine, this is a deed, like a real one." She shot him a glare that could melt steel. "It's under review. We'll be filing a claim with the county registrar. You'll be hearing from our legal team." That's when I knew it wasn't just a bluff. They were trying to take it legally or not, and Nadine Teller wasn't going to back down until someone forced her to. Fine by me. She picked the wrong guy to try and steal land from. 3 days passed without another word from Nadine or the HOA, but I knew better than to think they were finished. Folks like her don't let go. They burrow, scheme, wait for you to blink. I spent those days scanning my deed, backing it up 3 ways and digging into county land records. My property was still registered under my name, unchanged since the day I bought it with cash and a handshake. Late Thursday afternoon, the sound of construction equipment jolted me out of a nap on the porch. I stepped outside and saw a backhoe idling near the tree line, 30 feet from my cabin. 2 men in neon vests were stretching tape across the clearing, marking lines in the dirt. One of them noticed me. "You the owner here?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, walking down the slope. "Why?" He pulled out a folded permit. "We were told this was HOA land scheduled for trail development. They contracted us to clear a path through." I took the paper and scanned it. The property lot number listed wasn't mine, but it was close. Too close. "This isn't the right parcel," I said, handing it back. "You're standing on private land, and whoever hired you gave you bad coordinates." The guy looked back at his coworker, uneasy. "We were just following instructions, man." "Then you might want to call your boss before that backhoe tears up anything. Because if it touches 1 inch of this land, you'll be on the hook for trespass and damage, not the HOA." He hesitated, then walked off to make a phone call. I waited nearby, arms crossed, jaw tight. 15 minutes later, he came back. "Yeah, we're pulling out," he said. "Sorry about that." Our foreman says they're reviewing the lot numbers. Looks like they might have jumped the gun. I gave a short nod. You did. Thanks for stopping. They packed up and left, but the damage wasn't physical, it was strategic. Nadine had tried to sneak construction through the back door, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. But this wasn't my first rodeo. That evening, I drove to the county records office just to be safe. I requested a certified plat map of the area, including boundary overlays and zoning annotations. The clerk, a wiry guy with a tired voice, raised an eyebrow after printing the documents. Funny, he said. You're the third person to ask about your lot this month. The others weren't owners, though. Said they were with Lakeside Management. I tapped the counter. Did they request any changes? He flipped through a logbook and pointed. Yeah, looks like someone submitted a zoning variance request. It was denied last week. I stared at the record. They tried to reclassify my lot as common use green space. If it had slipped through, they could have moved forward without my consent. Thanks, I said. That helps more than you know. I drove home with the paperwork on the passenger seat, my mind already turning. They were trying to rewrite the map itself to erase me. That night, I installed 2 trail cameras, one facing the back lot line, the other near the gravel drive. I also set up a wide-angle dash-mounted camera inside my truck, pointed at the cabin. I wasn't just guarding against bulldozers now. I was guarding against sabotage. The next morning, I walked out to grab the paper and found a bright orange notice stapled to the post at the end of my drive. It wasn't from the county, it was stamped with the HOA's letterhead. Notice of non-compliance. Unauthorized dwelling on HOA-regulated land, you are hereby ordered to remove all structures within 30 days or face legal action and daily fines. I tore it down and took it inside. The wording was aggressive, but they'd overplayed their hand. They had no jurisdiction, no legal standing, and now I had proof they were trying to strong-arm me with fraudulent claims. I scanned the notice and added it to the growing folder I'd labeled Evidence, Lakeside HOA. Later that day, I drove down to the sheriff's department. I asked to speak with someone about potential property fraud. Deputy Marla Jensen, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, brought me into a back office. I laid out the documents, the original deed, the failed variance request, the construction permit with the wrong lot number, and the new notice nailed to my post. She read in silence for a solid 10 minutes, flipping back and forth between pages. You're telling me the HOA is trying to seize your land by reclassifying it and issuing fake compliance notices? She asked. Exactly. They've already tried to bulldoze it once. Now they're issuing threats. Next step is probably legal action or vandalism. Jensen nodded slowly. Do you have any proof of hostile intent? Recordings, emails, anything? I've got cameras up now, and I've got a neighbor who overheard their board meeting 2 weeks ago. Said they referred to me as an obstacle to development. She leaned back. Give me his name. If he's willing to give a statement, this becomes criminal real quick. Attempted land seizure through fraudulent filings is a felony. I gave her everything: name, number, even a copy of the plat map. She promised to open an investigation and keep me updated. By the time I got home, the sun was low and the wind had picked up. My neighbor across the road, George, a retired mechanic with a limp and a mean sense of humor, was sitting on his porch with a beer. You see the circus this morning? He called. If you mean the orange notice, yeah. They're running out of tricks, he shook his head. Nadine's been telling folks you're squatting, says your cabin's not up to code. I laughed once. That cabin passed inspection 3 times over, she's bluffing. Doesn't stop her from running her mouth. You want me to testify if this goes to court? I appreciated that more than I let on. I might take you up on that. That night, I checked the trail cam footage. At 2 in the morning, a figure had crept up the drive and tried to yank the camera off its post. They failed motion sensors, triggered a floodlight I'd rigged to a car battery. The image was grainy, but I could make out a hoodie and cargo pants. I copied the footage to a flash drive and drove it straight to Deputy Jensen the next morning. This is what you meant by sabotage, she asked. Yep. And I'll bet my last dollar it was someone from the HOA. She watched the footage again. Leave this with me. If we can ID the person, I'll bring them in. I felt something shift, then not just anger or suspicion, but momentum. They'd tried to steal my land. They'd tried to rewrite legal boundaries. They'd even sent someone in the dead of night to tamper with my equipment, and now the law was watching them. Let Nadine try again. I'd be ready. By the following Monday, I got a call from Deputy Jensen. She didn't waste time. We identified the person in your footage. Name's Wyatt Blevins. He's on the Lakeside Pines HOA Board Property Relations Subcommittee. I leaned against my truck, eyes narrowing. That mean anything to you? Means he's got access to every complaint, lot plan, and zoning request they file. And here's the kicker: he's been cited before for falsifying permit data on another HOA project 3 years ago. Different neighborhood, same tactics. My stomach tightened. You charging him? We're consulting the district attorney now. But I'll tell you this thing goes deeper than I thought. I asked if I needed to come in for a statement. She said not yet, but to keep my cameras running and not engage anyone directly, so I did exactly that. I added 2 more trail cams, one mounted in a hollowed tree limb facing the rear of my property line, the other concealed beneath the edge of my deck with a wide lens aimed at the approach from the side road. That same day, I took a trip down to the county municipal building. If the HOA had been submitting fraudulent requests, I wanted every scrap of paper tied to my address. A clerk named Janice helped me pull records going back 5 years. Took nearly 2 hours, but what I found made my jaw clench. There were 7 separate requests filed by the HOA attempting to reclassify my lot, each one using slightly adjusted parcel numbers. One even listed my cabin as unoccupied storage. All of them were denied, but not before sitting in review limbo for weeks. That meant Nadine and her crew had been trying this long before they ever knocked on my door. I asked Janice if anyone had ever flagged the pattern. She gave a tired shrug. We don't have a system that cross-references similar parcel IDs. If someone's smart enough to tweak the paperwork just right, it'll slip through unless someone's watching. I took copies of everything, added them to my folder now so thick it needed a binder. On my way out, I passed by a city council bulletin board. A notice caught my eye: public hearing on special zoning requests May 15th. My lot number was listed at the bottom, attached to an agenda item filed by Lakeside Pines Community Improvement Board. They were trying again. I circled the date in my calendar and called Deputy Jensen the moment I got home. They're pushing it through under a new name, I said. Already saw it, she replied. I've been coordinating with the DA. We're moving forward with a fraud investigation. 2 of the documents your HOA submitted used forged notary stamps. That changed everything. Falsifying official stamps was a felony. Do I need to appear at that hearing? I asked. I'd recommend it, but don't tip your hand. Let them walk into it. Over the next week, I kept my head down. I didn't respond to the new letter they left in my mailbox with more threats about unauthorized structures and pending removal. I didn't call Nadine. I didn't even acknowledge the 2 men who parked across from my drive every other evening in a silver sedan with tinted windows and clipboards they never used. I just prepped. I spent 3 nights building a large wooden display board in my garage. On it, I mounted copies of every document. The original deed, the county denials, the notice with the forged notary stamp, and a still image from the trail cam footage showing Wyatt Blevins trying to rip down my camera. When May 15th came, I put on a clean shirt, packed up the board, and drove to the town hall. The chamber was half full when I arrived. HOA folks sat in a tight cluster near the front: Nadine, Wyatt, and 3 others I recognized from mailers. They didn't notice me at first. I stayed in the back until they were called up to present their request. Nadine stepped to the podium like she owned the place. The Lakeside Pines Community Improvement Board is requesting reclassification of parcel 7C41 to common recreational use. The structure currently occupying the lot is non-permitted and presents a liability risk to the surrounding neighborhood. She spoke like a politician, calm, rehearsed, just enough legal jargon to sound credible. But when the councilwoman chairing the meeting asked for supporting documents, Wyatt handed over a folder I recognized. Same one he'd been carrying around during those mysterious roadside stakeouts. Then the chair asked, "Is the owner of parcel 7C41 present?" I stood. "My name's Franklin Nash." "And I'd like to respond." Nadine's head whipped around. For the first time her expression cracked. The chair nodded. "Go ahead." I walked to the front, set my board down, and flipped it open. This is the original deed to the property, purchased in full, recorded legally, and never transferred. "These," I said, pointing to the next row, "are 7 separate reclassification attempts made by the HOA, each using variations of my parcel number to try and slip through your system." Gasps rippled through the room. I continued. "Here, you'll see one of those documents bears a notary stamp that doesn't exist in the state's registry. The district attorney is currently investigating that as a forgery." I turned to the image from the trail cam. "And this is Wyatt Blevins, a sitting board member, attempting to disable a surveillance camera on my private property at 2 in the morning." Wyatt opened his mouth, but the chair cut him off. "Mr. Blevins, is that you in the photo?" He didn't answer. The chair turned to a clerk. "Please record that the witness has refused to respond." I finished with copies of 2 emails, anonymous tips that Deputy Jensen had received and shared with me under the open investigation. Both detailed internal communications from the HOA about reclaiming underutilized lots by exploiting ambiguity in parcel zoning. Nadine stood up, voice rising. "None of this has been verified. He's not a licensed surveyor. This is all circumstantial." The chair banged her gavel. "Miss Teller, sit down." That was the moment I knew it was over. The council voted unanimously to dismiss the reclassification request and issued a formal complaint to the State Homeowner Association Regulation Board. The city attorney announced an immediate audit into all Lakeside Pines filings from the last 5 years. As I walked out, a reporter from the local paper asked for a quote. I just said, "Sometimes you've got to remind people where the lines are drawn." Literally. 2 days later, Deputy Jensen called again. "We arrested Wyatt this morning. Forgery, trespassing, attempted property fraud. We're building a wider case against the board." "Any word on Nadine?" I asked. "She's under investigation." The forged documents were filed under her signature. Over the next month, the HOA unraveled like a rotten sweater. Board members resigned. Meetings were canceled. Residents started organizing a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely. Turns out I wasn't the only one they tried to pressure, just the first to push back hard enough to make it hurt. By July, the new community group, independent from any formal HOA, elected a rotating neighborhood council. George, my neighbor, joined it. First order of business: a motion to formally recognize all existing private property boundaries as sacrosanct, backed by certified county maps. And just like that, the cabin wasn't under siege anymore. It was home again. The summer heat settled in heavy by early August, the kind that made the forest buzz with cicadas and turned the gravel underfoot to powder. The cabin stood quiet, but I wasn't. With the HOA board members scattered and the audit in full swing, I finally had room to breathe, but I wasn't about to let things simmer quietly and fade into memory. Not after what they'd tried to pull. The county attorney's office had subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications. A few weeks into the audit, they uncovered something far worse than zoning fraud. It was an email chain between Nadine, Wyatt, and a private developer, Midland Equity Holdings. The messages detailed a covert plan to bundle several underused lots, including mine, into a land transfer agreement. In exchange, the developer had agreed to fund new amenities for the Lakeside Pines area: a tennis court, a pool, and a private clubhouse. All contingent on the HOA regaining control of the lots. The email that set the fire blazing was from Nadine herself, dated 6 months earlier. Midland has agreed to proceed once our legal claim on 7C41 is cleared. Franklin Nash might resist, but will push an emergency vote to classify the lot as abandoned if necessary. Once it's ours, bulldozing can begin within 45 days. That was criminal conspiracy plain and ugly. Deputy Jensen called me in to review the findings. I met her at the county prosecutor's office, where Assistant DA Rachel Lynn handed me a printed copy of the email. "This is the smoking gun," she said, tapping the page with a capped pen. Not only did they falsify documents and misuse notary credentials, but they attempted to transfer your property without your consent to a private developer for financial gain. That's enough for felony charges: racketeering, criminal misappropriation, and attempted unlawful transfer of real property. I nodded once. "And the developer?" Rachel gave a dry laugh. "They're claiming they were misled by the HOA and had no idea the land wasn't theirs to sell. We'll be following up, but most of our focus is on the board members. Nadine Teller is our priority." A week later, the Sheriff's Department served warrants on 3 former HOA board members. Nadine was arrested at her lake house in a gated community 2 towns over. They brought her in without incident, but the footage of her being led out in handcuffs made the local news that night. I watched it with George on his porch, nursing a cold lemonade and listening to the crickets. "They always think they're too clever to get caught," he said. "They almost didn't," I replied. "If they'd waited another 2 months before filing that zoning request, I wouldn't have seen the hearing notice in time." George scratched his chin. "You think they knew you were digging?" "I think they got used to nobody checking. The county dissolved the Lakeside Pines HOA completely within 30 days of the arrests. The board's assets, including a slush fund Nadine had moved into a private account, were seized. Turns out she'd been skimming dues and channeling funds into a shell company registered in her cousin's name. Another crime added to the stack, but the fallout didn't end there. When the state's Department of Real Property Oversight sent investigators to review the case, they discovered that Lakeside Pines wasn't the only neighborhood where Nadine had tried similar tactics. She'd served on 3 other boards over the past decade and had a pattern of pressuring elderly residents to voluntarily transfer lots for community enrichment. 2 of those residents had passed away shortly after signing over land. One of them had no heirs, but the other did. A woman named Carla Munro reached out to me after reading about the case in the local paper. Her father had signed over his 3-acre parcel 5 years ago after repeated visits from Nadine. She'd found the paperwork just months ago while cleaning out his storage unit. It had all seemed fine until she saw the forged signature on the notary line. "They told him it was for a nature preserve," she said. "Next time I visited, there were survey flags and a commercial sign for a housing development." Carla handed everything over to the DA. Her case was added to the growing list of charges. By late September, the trial began. I was called as a key witness. I wore the same boots I'd worn when Nadine first showed up on my driveway, just to remind myself where it started. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, former residents, even ex-HOA members who had quietly quit when the board's tactics got too shady. I gave my testimony, laying out the timeline, the paper trail, and the recorded footage. When Rachel Lynn played the video of Wyatt trying to dislodge my trail cam, the jury's mood shifted visibly. That wasn't just bureaucratic abuse, it was physical evidence of tampering and intimidation. Nadine's defense attorney tried to paint her as a misguided leader, someone who had overreached in her passion for community betterment. But the jury didn't buy it. Too many documents, too much coordination, too many victims. She was found guilty on 7 counts, including conspiracy to commit fraud, unlawful attempt to transfer private property, and misappropriation of community funds. Sentencing came 2 weeks later, 6 years in state prison, no parole for the first 3. Wyatt took a plea deal 18 months in exchange for full cooperation and testimony against the others. The remaining board members received fines and probation. After the sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into crisp autumn air. Rachel Lynn joined me on the steps. "You planning to stay on that lot?" she asked. "I built that cabin with my own hands," I said. "They'd need a wrecking ball and a court order to move me," she smiled. "Well, they're fresh out of both. Back at the cabin, things got quieter. The trails Nadine wanted paved over stayed wild. The gravel drive belonged to me alone again, and the wooden board I'd built for the hearing, I hung it on the wall of the cabin as a reminder, not of the fight but of the win. A few neighbors came together to form a real community group, not an HOA, just folks helping each other keep things clean and safe. George ran a tool-lending library out of his shed. Carla Munro moved into her father's old place and started a native plant garden on the front half-acre. One Saturday, a few of us stood around a fire pit behind the cabin, roasting sausages and telling stories. Someone asked how long I'd lived there. "Long enough to know when someone's trying to steal it," I said. We all laughed, not the nervous kind, but the earned kind. The kind that says, "Yeah, we've been through it and we're still standing." And as the fire crackled and the woods settled down around us, I looked at the trees, the sky, the slope of the land beneath my feet, still mine, still home.